Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Garage Studio Modelers. I'm Dave Forrest, this is my good friend
Harvey Lowe.
And in today's episode, we're going to progress into doing the weathering on Harvey Sheridan.
Yeah. So, no, we were just snickering earlier because we kind of like tell jokes to each other to get us in the mood to do this. It's such a serious hobby.
It is.
Right?
Mildly inappropriate jokes.
Yes.
Mildly.
Yeah, so welcome back. Now, my first thing is my apologies. Like, people are asking, can we do the episodes on the Sheridan more regularly? But given our schedules, we can only have time to shoot when we get to shoot. So I know it might have been a while since we're back at the Sheridan, but we promise we do follow through on each and every one of our projects. So for the last episode, for those of you that are connecting into this series of videos on the Sheridan, you saw that I had finished the modulation phase, right? Mm-hmm. I learn off you because you are a master at modulation, my friend. You are.
Thank you.
Modulation, as just to sum up, is something I think you have to do now. Would you agree? Like you can't just do the old school one.
Yeah.
Well, you could.
Yeah, I agree. Now, how you do it, there's different ends to that, or different means to that end. But I agree because if you don't, it sucks all the light out of it.
It doesn't. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's hard to tell. There's a camera on this model now, but I did finesse the modulation a little bit more off camera, and you can see, right, there's subtle differences in the scheme.
I mean, it's artistic license, but I think it works. Like you're trying to replicate shadows and the effects of sun and the elements and weathering and whatnot. So you need. I
think you do.
Yeah, and I think it's got to. Like, I'm a big believer that it's got to look like in the initial, like after you've just done it, it's got to look pretty awful. Like it's got to be very contrasty, very gaudy, very, you know what I mean?
Yes. In fact,
because it tones down
over once the weathering comes in. And one of our commenters, in fact, now that you twigged me on this, one of the comments I got on the Sheridan is, I'm sorry that I forget the fellow's name, but he says, don't be afraid, I'm just paraphrasing him, don't be afraid of contrast.
Yeah.
And he's right.
Yeah, bang on.
So you actually want contrast here. If it's too subtle, you lose it. Right? And that's probably, I'll admit, if there's a weakness I have, I do all this modulation, especially in aircraft, and then it's gone because I've covered it too much.
Well, aircraft is different.
Yeah, you want to be more subtle.
Yeah, you got to be a little more subtle.
Right.
Otherwise, that does look kind of...
But this, believe it or not, all this is modulation on the turret. You can see the dark areas, the light areas. It's complete now. I finessed it a bit more. I don't have to do too much on the bottom because you can't see it.
You can't see it much, yeah.
But you can see it's there. And I added yellow and flesh to lighten up the green. Try not to use whites because I find it's very bleachy.
Right? Yeah, I agree. White, like the great colors I like are even like the Tamiya flesh color.
It's
got a little bit of warmth, a little bit of depth to it. Using white, unless it's on a gray, but even grays, you can still use.
You can still use them. Add a bit of warmth.
It does get pretty bleachy. You're right.
So even for when I haven't done an episode yet on black colored subjects. Maybe a Defiant one day, but I know for even black you want to add some color to them, perhaps deep reds, to give it a bit of warmth. So you can see there's the turret. I'm satisfied with the modulation, and this is the hull. Same thing. You can see that there's.
And just before I forget on the topic of modulation, so there was on Facebook, and I can't remember the modeler's name, but he was doing a Hellcat.
Yep.
And in the dark sea blue, the 3-tone, but he highlighted. Like he black based, and then he went over to each panel in a different color. So you'd have one in a vibrant blue, one in yellow, one in a green, and then he covered everything off, and that gave the variation. So that's like for air. I don't know how well that would work necessarily for armor.
Yes,
maybe it would work. I mean, it probably would work, but certainly a very good application for aircraft.
I do that technique on tracks. So I will do that on. In fact, I haven't done the tracks yet, but I'll do that technique. I actually use very vibrant yellows, blues, greens on the track, and then you blend it together with a track color, and you can see that color coming out. And I'll show the viewers on a subsequent episode how to use that. For this one, the only modulation color, you saw the previous episode, one was white and then black shading, and the other was black basing, black base with white. And I only use those two colors. But you're right, you can use different rainbow colors to get a different effect. I chose not to on this one because it's armor. Now, I'm kind of like moving off topic, but I am working on a Silveria Marchetti SM75, and I did do the black basing. I chose white only because I didn't want so much vibrancy happening. It depends on your preference of the aircraft. I want it more subtle. Yeah. But yes, you can. So now that we've done the modeling, it's ready to go. Now you'll notice, if the camera shows it, this one's being gloss coated, and this one has not, right? And I actually applied a wash to the bottom, not to the top yet, on this gloss covered hull. Now, why am I talking about gloss and matte? I find for me, there's no set steps in the way I weather armor. I don't know if you have, but I do modulation first. That's a given. And then I usually start with a wash right after that. Do you do that? Or do you do your washes later?
That's a good question. I kind of jump around a bit, but typically, so my order of operations is you do the modulation. You put, if you're going to put filters on.
Right.
Then if there's decals, that's where you do the glossing, putting the application of the decals. And then I get into washes, and then the pigments, and then the muds, etc. But sometimes, depending on part of the vehicle I'm working on, I may jump around and not do that in exact order.
Very good, because that was exactly what I was saying. I don't have a set steps. The only ones I agree and that we usually do first is modulation.
But I never gloss coat unless I'm putting a decal.
I gloss coat when I use washes. Only because I find that, I use gloss or semi-gloss. Here's the rule though. If you are using washes, try to do them on an either semi-gloss or gloss base, because then the wash will flow.
It does flow better.
It flows better.
Yeah.
If you're using a filter, do it on a flat base. So that's why I'm following yours, and there's no script.
Yeah, you're right.
There's no script to what we're talking about. So I'm gonna take.
But I still do washes. You're right though. The washes are a little bit more. You have to pay attention to them a little bit more.
You do
on a flat.
Right. So here.
Which is why I really like an eggshell finish.
That's what I'm getting at. Now this is gloss because it's out of expediency for the video. I actually sprayed this gloss on using. Vallejo out of a can. Just sprayed the gloss.
You're brave.
Yeah, I am brave. So, two things here.
I bet you wouldn't do that on an aircraft.
No. No, I wouldn't use the spray can. I would use an airbrush. So, again, this is gloss base, and this is unglossed, because you're right, I want to do filters on the turret first, because it's kind of sitting away from the mud. Doing filters on here, I don't know if it's worth it, because it'll be covered in dust and crap. So
yeah, you're right.
I'm going to do the filters on the turret, and then this one is strictly washes. Will I do a wash on this? Absolutely I will, but I'll do it after the filters.
Yes.
And gloss.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes total sense to me.
Right? So let's start first with washes. And I said earlier before that when you're doing a wash, I prefer a gloss base or a semi-gloss because then it flows in. Now I actually use my go-to. This is I don't know if they have these anymore at film stores. These are the old camera film canisters, but you could use a bottle. And I use Winsor Newton oils. And in this case, this is raw umber number 554. I just like the patina of this. And I put in usually, well, for these, you would use either the Eptilon odorless thinner, or you can use Humbrol.
But any enamel thinner.
Any enamel thinner. Maybe fill it halfway. I've used some of this on the model. Put a couple of, pea size of the 554 in there and shake it around. So this is what I've already applied here. Now, why have I applied it earlier? Because when I apply a wash, I usually let it sit for a bit of time before you start working it. So I applied this just before filming, maybe an hour before we filmed. And I'll show you now that it's applied. In fact, why don't we do this the proper way? I'm going to remove this beautiful felt because I don't want to get it dirty.
Yeah, I'll take that for you.
And I'm going to just temporarily use this old recycle magazine. I recycle, paper junk mail. And I'll show you a bit about how I work with washes. So again, any type of enamel wash will do. MIG sells them, AK sells them. I like Winsor Newton because the pigmentation is so fine. And I've already applied one coat. If you're applying this stuff, you'll know the consistency of how much you want the Winsor Newton oil in there. When you apply it, it begins to settle in the creases. Okay, that's what you want. Like I'm reapplying it; it's already there, but you want it to settle. That's why you want a gloss coat.
So and what do you do? Like because you're applying it, the large brush, pretty rough.
Yeah,
very rough. Do you kind of clean it from the areas you don't want it, or what do you?
We have this rehearsed because that is the segue to the step I'm going to do. Very good. So now that I've applied, now this one I just applied just to show you I'm not doing it.
So you would let it dry a bit.
Let it dry.
Right.
I find the optimum time is 2 to 3 hours drying time.
And it still comes off after that?
Yes. Yeah. You can do it a day later, but the problem is if the longer
it's pushing it. Yeah, at some point it's not going to come off.
No.
Yeah.
And the longer you leave this on, the more the overall, it acts like a filter. It gives you this patina brown look. If you leave it on for like a day and you take it off, you might be taking it off, but it's leaving this residual.
And the finish would factor into that, right? So a gloss finish, less chance of that happening because it's protected.
Correct.
A flat finish, it's going to seep in there, and you have that.
Correct. Exactly. It's totally. If it's flat, it's acting like a filter, and that's why you don't want that. So as now, I find that Humbrol thinner, enamel thinner, is my go-to. This stuff is very good, but Humbrol enamel thinner really smells. That as I'm taking it off now, see what you said before? I'm not leaving it all. You can leave it all on, but it's going to give you this overall brown. Yeah. Right? You can also take paper towel or sponges.
I love the smell of thinner in the morning.
The smell of thinner. Now, here's the thing. Like you can blotch it. See? It gives it a bit of a textured look with the wash. Do you see what I mean? Or you can take it all off. Now, I learned this from you. Start off with the bottom of the hull and use that as your test base. Now, I'm being really quick here, and I'll finesse this off camera later. But the gloss also protects the original surface.
So you're wetting that.
I'm wetting it and wiping stuff away or blotching it.
So this is part of the removal process.
See, there's the removal process.
I got it.
Now, I find with odorless thinners, it's not as strong as the Humbrol enamel thinner, which will remove a lot more, but it's odorless. Because that Humbrol stuff, you need to open the window. But you see how it's taking it off? This wash was sitting here for about an hour and a half. And anything longer, you can, but it's just harder to remove. It's hard to see in the camera, but there is a difference. You can see there's something happening here. There isn't anything. It's just kind of like a dark wash. And that's kind of not what you want. So just put a whole bunch on, and you can see with your paper towel, it's coming off. And you can streak it like this. You can entirely wipe it off, or you can blotch it. So you're really working that wash, almost to give it another level of modulation, if you will. You can use different colored washes. I tend to stick to dark browns at this stage.
Yeah, dark browns are pretty universal.
It's a nice...
Go well with olive drab, with panzer yellow, with three-tone camo.
Yep, totally.
Russian 4BO green.
Yes.
Panzer gray even. Right?
But I wouldn't use like in this case the vehicle's olive drab. I wouldn't use an olive drab oil. It doesn't do anything.
Oh, you won't see it, right?
It just doesn't. You want some contrast. So we're done with that. And now I do usually start with the lower chassis. And again, you see here, I'm doing it quick, but you want to just wipe off the areas on the broader surface. leaving the wash to keep settle.
Now, what's your plan for, like, how, are you putting mud on that later,
Yes.
or you are?
Absolutely.
And you think it's worth doing the wash on the component parts now?
Good question.
With the,
Here's what I call the way I do weathering. It's layering. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, except what we talked about generally about modulation. But I usually kind of like this universal wash of modulation as it sets the base. Once you start applying the mud, which we'll do in a second, I will probably reapply a wash on top of that. But the wash could be something, it could be the same raw umber, or it could be another wash of something else, perhaps like
like one of the mud colors or something that you're using, right?
Yeah, or
to indicate wet mud versus
dust.
Or dust.
Dust.
Yeah.
This is where the art of modeling comes in. That there is no set formula, and each model will basically dictate.
I mean, but you can start off by doing like a paint by numbers approach.
You can.
Right? And then until you get comfortable with it, and then you'll find your own way with things. That's what happened with me, right?
Yep.
Like I did have a fairly strict, I do this first, I do this, I do this, I do this, and then after a while, once you get comfortable with it,
Correct.
You kind of figure things out, right?
You do. And we talked about this before. Your eye will tell you if something's wrong.
Yes.
And the only way to train your eye to do that is to do that.
It's experience.
It's experience. Yep. It's less the technique. It's like, okay, that looks right. Mm-hmm. So I stop, right? Now,
the more you do, the more you see.
Yes.
That's what builds that.
So all I'm doing now, you're right. Normally I start with a wash because while there's mud and dust, less here. So I kind of do the whole thing, and then I do the mud, and then I apply a wash, and then I do it. It's layering. It's back and forth. You can see now that there's a lot coming off, and I'm doing this in front of the camera ad lib so that I'll refine it as I get home. But you do have a working time of a day perhaps to get the stuff off.
So that's a slightly different approach that you and I have. Like you're doing with everything off, like the running gear, the tracks off.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm kind of leaning more towards your way, because you won't see much here.
It depends on the vehicle, though.
It does. It does.
The nice thing about this way is you can really get in there and do a more complete job.
Right.
Right. But for me, it's balancing that versus the hassle of putting the running gear, like the wheels and the tracks on after the fact.
Very true. The only advantage is if want to show that, like, I prefer less is best. If I was doing Eastern Front tons of mud, I wouldn't do it. If there's side skirts, I wouldn't do it. Can't see it, don't bother. But now you're working the wash here in various ways. So this one, you can do streaking down, and what's happening is you're not simply removing, and I'm just using a flat brush you can use. I don't know if this helps, but I just got this flashlight out, and you can kind of see where there's modulation, those little round.
Yeah, you can really see
you can see it,
like the almost the patina you were talking about. Yeah.
Some I did with the paper towel and sponged it, and see this little area that's kind of it just looks random, and that's just playing around with the brown wash.
You steal one of the sponges from Shirley's makeup drawer.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And then I put them back when they're used. So you can see that the wash on this side, I've wiped quite a bit away from the center part of the vehicle.
Yeah, and you can tell where it's built up in the crevices.
You can see what's built up.
Yeah.
There. And that's just the brown wash. There's no mud, there's nothing else there. And I'm doing it fairly quickly so that, and you can see why I'm putting, by the way, this stuff on the magazine.
But it is a bit of a it's an organic process, I find.
And it varies. I find that it varies on each model. Yeah. Each model, I take a different approach.
Yeah. And what looks right.
What looks right.
You're going back to your point about your eye knows. Right?
Yeah. And I'm doing this fairly quick. So normally I'd spend a little more time. If I was building this for like a contest, I'd really work it and take my time. Apply. If it doesn't work, put a little more wash and work it. So this stage I will call a wash and working with the first wash. Again, do you need to do a wash at this stage if you're going to apply mud? You don't have to. But I just find it's just sets an overall base because I like my weathering light. Okay, so now the wheels again. There's no wash on these. See, if there's a wash on that, you can see there's a difference.
Yeah.
And
Definitely toned down, which goes back to the point we were making about make sure your modulation is vibrant because it will get toned down.
yeah, and look at this. That's the same color.
Yeah.
But
Well,
this one's darker because it's got the wash on it, even though it's gloss.
Yeah.
So if you don't want this patina, don't leave the wash on too long. Okay? So now that we've done the wash, then you have a whole bunch of other products you can use. And this is where it gets a little tricky. So we've done the modulation, we've done the wash. I find the next step is you can start playing around with the mud. Right?
Oh, that's the fun part.
The fun part. And I like oils. These are the Eptalon oils. I love oils. You love the acrylic. The acrylic
I do.
paste.
Yeah,
whatever,
I do.
Right?
Because it's a texture thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just easier. It's cheaper. It's yeah.
Do you not find them a little too vibrant in color?
Depends on what color you're using. I used to use that light earth color. It's too bright. I use a dark mud and then I kind of lighten up from there. So I changed that.
But then you also apply a bit of airbrush work to it.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Right.
Just because of the little particles that give it the texture, they're kind of.
And it blends it.
Yeah, because they can kind of sparkle a bit, right?
Ah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, so if you
what do you mean by
rotate-
sparkle?
Well, like if you they'll catch the light, like they're almost like they're like little crystals, and I guess if they're not covered by whatever pigment is in the mud, they catch the light, they sparkle.
Oh, I didn't know.
So I guess
I
like
don't use them.
Yeah, so that's why I use the matte earth is to help to give it a little bit of depth, like it's a lighter earth color, and it mats out the sparkly effect.
I see. Well, you don't have.
But you don't have to worry about that with oils.
Oils.
You're right.
Now, usually, you can chime in on this. I like 3 different colors of mud.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Right?
rule 3 is generally a
You
safer
don't need
rule of thumb.
5. You don't need 7. I find like a medium, a dark, and a very light. Now, I've just happened to choose light mud, dark mud, and this really bright dust. And
Yeah.
again, I find the best way is to play on the bottom because not every color that you choose may be suitable for, right?
Yeah,
A
yeah,
certain base
I
color.
agree. I think the bottom is a great place to experiment.
Right?
You figure out what you're going to do for the rest of the vehicle.
That's right. And again, you got to just start.
But the nice thing about oils too is that if you don't like it, you can just a little bit thinner on a brush, and you can remove all of it.
Right. And I find that I start with just applying the dark around the crevices and the areas where there be buildup.
See, I'll do what you're doing,
Yes.
but I'll do it on something that's textured. So that's why I like that acrylic mud
I see.
because it gives a bit of texture. Now again, it depends on the look you're going for the vehicle, but I would once I build that base up, then I would use this to kind of fine tune some of the hues of the.
That's a good point. Now, I have in the past applied texture by using various lacquer primers. So I would use like the Mr. Surfacer 500, and I'd actually put in a bit of plaster of Paris and mix it.
For texture, yeah.
Yeah, and then I'd apply it onto. I didn't do it this time because I figure it depends.
Plaster of Paris is what everybody used in the old days before all of this convenience hit the market, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
totally. Now, like, what am I doing? I have no idea what
You're
I'm
just
doing.
all over the place. Look at you.
I'm
You're
just
just
all over the place.
dabbing mud colors willy-nilly.
Willy-nilly all over the place. Now, again, what kind of brush? For this part, like something large. And you know, you're kind of like just... It looks really horrible, but start on the bottom, right? And this is where you want to start getting some tonal value.
Where is this process going?
Where is this process going, right? Where is it going, right? Getting a lot of it off, and then working it, right? So you can see that there's like brown areas towards the crevices, and I'm doing this fairly quick. And now what I normally do, since I'm kind of doing this rough, is to let it sit a bit.
Yeah.
Like I'm doing this all wet, but I would actually let this set for an hour or so.
Yeah, it might be.
Less.
Yeah, and
because it's too wet,
yeah.
right? But I'm just doing this quick to give you an idea that you got to start somewhere, and I just usually just throw it on, and then.
And usually when I use the oils, I'll let and I know because we're on camera, not it's not a lot of time. You can't let it sit too much.
Yes, right.
But, you would let the linseed oil leach out a bit, right? So
that's right.
It's a little bit, yeah.
We're doing it quick,
yeah.
So it probably. But see, if you let it set, then you kind of work it, and you start blending. Right? Now again, this linseed hasn't settled quite because we do everything live. But you go back over the dark brown.
Yeah, it's starting to come together.
It's starting to. You can use a sponge and just kind of like. I usually keep the center areas open, not like wiped clean, and then I work the edges. And where the lighter mud meets the darker, that's when you start blending, stippling with it. Now again, I'm doing this fairly quickly, but you'd probably want a round brush, which I have somewhere here, as opposed to a flat brush. It's kind of like figure painting, and you're kind of stippling it. So I don't want to remove that. I'm kind of working it all together. And again,
you want that to collect under that, in that kind of that crevice or that.
Right? You can kind of see.
Yeah.
Get the light on there now. It looks horrible, but once you're getting there.
Yeah, yeah. Now it's just a matter of working it where you want it, right?
Yeah, you're refining where you want it, and again, you'd probably let these oil colors bleed out a little more. The linseed oil, you can see it starting to bleed out. I would put these on for maybe half an hour to an hour and let them bleed out a bit more because they're really too wet right now. But since we do everything live, and you're working with the thinner, the odorless thinner is great for this because it doesn't smell. And just kind of stippling and working it, right? And I want a little bit more dark in there. But you want now this is the really light stuff. You want some contrast in there.
Yeah.
As you're working. See? Now, again, it just looks rough when you're doing it. And you're constantly applying and removing and blending.
It's a very organic process. You're kind of taking some away, adding some more, away, moving it around.
That's right. See, and you're I call it building up. See, there's the dark stuff coming in again. Now, some people have a larger palette and they mix the colors, so they have a range. It's really.
But 3 is more than enough. To be honest, you can get by with 2.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
And just work your, you kind of mix in the middle, right?
And then I'm just dabbing it with the sponge to kind of see it's slowly working its way.
Yeah, it's
right?
getting there. Very nice.
Right. It's sometimes you don't want to sit there and do this for several weeks. It's mud, and you just kind of you actually want that random look. Maybe there's a little bit more build up here, and again, put the flashlight. See, it's getting there. Now that's a little rough there.
It looks good though.
You
could leave it like that.
You could just.
And it's funny, like with the oils, there is a bit of texture, a tiny bit of texture with the oils.
There is,
depending on how much you leave on there, right?
I just find that with Vietnam vehicles, they're dusty in Vietnam. So you're right, I didn't add the texture, but for sure, Eastern Front with your stew that you're working on, it's probably a great idea. And like I say, plaster of Paris still works wonders, and I'm stippling. And you see this little round area. What are these? What are these?
Access hatches or whatever.
Access hatches for something. You can actually take like a Q-tip and then wipe everything away, so that you have some areas that actually have like nothing.
Yeah.
And it gives that contrast. So you can just take this and just wipe away anything and everything. And the Q-tip's best. I don't have one here right now, but you want that contrast. And so I love the sponges because it just has that. It's doing the mixing as you go. And you're right. Start with the hull until you get used to it. Right. And I use
it's a great place to kind of experiment.
Right. Now there's a lot here, so I'm gonna. Now you can. Where do you go with balance, Dave? Like I find that there's a lot here. Do you do a lot here? I find it's better to be a little random.
Yeah.
right?
I mean, there's no right or wrong answer to that.
Right. Since I got a lot
it's just
here.
got to look. It's got to look good. It's got to look right, and your eye will tell you if it looks right or not.
Yeah, right now this doesn't look right because there's too much here, and so I kind of want
Maybe yes, maybe no.
a balance. And don't forget, the back here is where you really want to lock because it's
Yeah, I
coming
mean,
off.
yeah, you're right because that's where a lot of the mud would
Right.
churn up based on the direction of the tracks.
Right.
And
right.
the rear of the vehicle is always going to be a little bit worse.
That's right. And again, it just looks horrible, but you're going to be taking away. Look how much is coming off on this stuff. You're going to be taking away a lot of this stuff and just using the residual. And right now I've got 3 colors going.
Yeah, and like when you take that away, you can work in some streaking effects.
Yeah,
and
yeah. See, now you can add maybe a bit of the lighter stuff and just stipple it in, and it is organic, and this looks artificial because it looks like it's too much brushwork, and then you come back and don't forget the bottom. Who looks at it, right? Except maybe at an APS or IPMS contest where they flip. Oh, look at that mud, but you're just kind of blending it, and again, you can kind of wipe away I find that the best is to wipe away the center sections and leave it kind of caked in. And it's kind of getting there.
Yeah,
Now, I just don't like this dust there, but you'll work it. But you get the idea. It's already giving a lot of just interest in the way that... Now, you see how the light, medium, and the dark get blended in.
Mm-hmm.
You're still... Again, I'd work this a little bit more finesse rather than quickly doing it on. But that just kind of gives you the option. So I usually start with this wash and then with these oils. You like the acrylics. The other thing that I usually do, which I didn't do here, because every model's different, I love XF52 Earth.
Mm.
And I sometimes, before I do this, I spray a very miscoat of this stuff on the undersides to give a dust effect.
See,
Right?
I do that. I do that after, so I'll apply the acrylic and then
See?
do that. But that's the color. That's the exact same
Right.
color I use.
So we're saying, do you do it before everything with the or did you do it after?
Kind of depends.
Depends.
Yeah.
So this time I didn't, but I'm going to do this later off camera, very misted without losing, and maybe just certain areas. I use this little guy here for misting. This is a PS268 Krios. It's basically a water.
It's a cute little airbrush.
It is, and it's great when you don't
Single
want
action.
finesse. Single action, right? Single action. I got this in Tokyo for like $30, and the only reason I use this for like dusting on hulls is you don't want to maybe get your HPB Iwata with so many parts. This is, look, that's the needle. It comes out. Once you cleaning an airbrush is, I hate it. Like, I don't like doing it. That's it. And this part comes off. The crown comes off.
Easy.
And easy to clean. So I'll do this off camera with this brush and mist it on and see how that works. But, sorry, Dave?
No, at what point I see you've got some pigments over there.
Yes.
At what point do the pigments come into play?
Back onto the script. That's next. So, again, I'm doing this stage and kind of getting a foundation. Let's see how that looks. It's getting there.
Yeah, it's getting
there, right? And just to make it more
To be honest, with
natural.
all the stuff you're putting on there, I wasn't sure it was going to get there, but
It's getting there. It's getting there. And again, I'd be a little bit more finessed, but you can kind of see how you're mixing the paints and letting some of the base color show through. See? It's getting there.
Yeah.
This part looks nice, and I'll probably repeat this down there. Yeah. And it looks a little rough at this time, but you can get it. Right there, it's getting nice.
Yeah,
it's getting there.
That's good.
So, powders. So now we're kind of done with the oils. Let's get this out of the way. Because I don't want to dirty up the table here. So, and you can see I've removed a lot. Any cardboard will do. These are the cup holders. I guess what do you call these when you get them from coffee stores?
Oh, for the hot.
Yeah,
The insulators or whatever.
yeah. And I'll put that aside. Now,
Thanks everybody. We'll see everybody next time.
Okay.
Take care all.